This is so exciting. Hi, everyone. I don't know about you. We are in the presence of two legends right now. Am I right? I mean, this is amazing. I'm so excited. I also have to tell you, for those of you who have not picked up this book yet, you're going to want to start it early in the day because you won't put it down. And as soon as you finish it, maybe in tears like I was, you're going to want to go back and look again at all the beautiful art, which we're going to talk about today, and just revisit all these wonderful characters that you're not going to say goodbye to. So don't start this too late in the day. You're not going to want to stay up too late spending all the time. So I wanted to start out, I know, Jean, there is a wonderful story about the origin of the Lunar New Year love story plot. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. I've been wanting to do a rom-com for a very long time, and I've also wanted to work with Lin Wen Pham for a very long time because we've been friends. We've been friends since we were both at the beginning of our careers. The rom-com part, I think it's because I'm like really good at romance. I'm just kidding. I'm not good at romance. You don't need to shake your head though.
Sorry.
This is kind of rude. This book actually began with a college girlfriend. I dated this young woman for a few years while I was in college. I thought she was super cute. And one of the things I really liked about her is she had lots of opinions, you know, especially about Valentine's Day. She thought that Valentine's Day was a scam that corporations had made up so that they could sell us candy and cards and that sort of thing. So she wanted nothing to do with it. But I liked her a lot, so I really wanted to celebrate Valentine's Day with her. And my workaround was Lunar New Year. You know, Lunar New Year and Valentine's Day, they're these two different holidays on two different calendars. One's on an Eastern calendar, the other one's on a Western calendar. But they are almost always right next to each other. Like this year, they're only 4 days apart. Every time February rolled around, I would ask my girlfriend out to Lunar New Year dinner. I would buy her Lunar New Year presents. I would draw her these Lunar New Year cards with like dragons and phoenixes in the shapes of hearts. And it totally worked. She would always agree to go with me. So ever since then, Lunar New Year and Valentine's Day have had this connection for me in my head. Now that girlfriend eventually dumped me for a bunch of different reasons. You know, I was very immature at the time, for sure. But she also told me that she wanted to be a nun. So we stayed broken up for a year, and after, like during that year, my life really changed. Like I started teaching high school, I started publishing comics, and then by the end of that year, she called me up and she told me that she had decided she wasn't going to be a nun. And then a year after that, we got married, and now we have 4 kids. Now we have 4 kids. So on my side, at least, that was the beginning of this book.
That's amazing. That is the best story. It's so sweet. I have to say, though, our main character in the book, Valentina, she does not feel so warm and fuzzy about Valentine's Day. And it's not just the commercialism. There's actually a little more to it. There's sort of a curse that she thinks is going on. Could you both tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Valentina is, in some ways, a cartoon version of Lin Wen Pham.
No. What happened was when Jean and I first started to work on this, Jean had like this great idea to do this romance. And the story, when he introduced it to me, he was introducing to me this girl, and we started off with all these conversations about our own dating histories and who it was we dated. So I just started filling in Jean with all of my like love atrocities that I've gone through since high school. And I have a lot of them. I have a lot of just terrible, terrible stories. And just like Teresa, Jean's wife, like I never cared for Valentine's Day. But it was because a lot of it came from the way the story was sort of structured too. I used to make Valentines when I was a kid. Like my parents never bought those store-bought Valentines for us. You know, like we were immigrants. They didn't understand what it was about. They just weren't going to shell out $5 for a bunch of cards. So I was always the kid where, when I was a kid, they would pass out those Valentine's cards, and I would be the only one that never had a Valentine's card to give. So I would draw Valentine's cards for people and hand them out, and that's a little bit of where sort of the story came from. But Valentine's Day always just seemed like the cheesiest, most corporate kind of creep. I'm so with Teresa on that one. I'm sorry. And also because I've had so many crazy sort of dating atrocities. It is true. I think I came in with a little bit more of a little more pessimistic about what love is supposed to be. But Vietnamese culture in general, the character, we agreed early on that she was going to be Vietnamese. And so a lot of my own history got woven into that because we're just sort of writing about the fabric of our own lives. And so the Vietnamese, if there are any Vietnamese people out there, we love tragedy, right? We are all about sadness. Like every soap opera ends with someone dying. Every fairy tale, like the beautiful princess, always throws herself off a cliff or has to prove herself. And so, like, we're just all about tragedy. So a lot of that dovetailed very nicely with how this character was going to approach cynically the idea of love and curses. And there's a generational idea, and then there's like the historical idea of what goes behind it.
Oh, I love that. And you really do get that sense of Val when you're reading the story, that she has this romantic heart that really wants that beautiful love story and also lives for maybe some of the drama of heartbreak. But her bestie, her best friend, Bernice, she has a very different take on love. There's actually a quote that I loved where she's like, "It's all a game," which, like, oh, that it were that easy, right? Could you tell us a little bit about Bernice and their relationship? I loved their friendship in the story.
I do have to say, you know, I've gotten the pleasure of working with a bunch of different artists on different projects, but this is the one where the artist actually bled into the writing the most. And I think some of that is because the main character is a young woman, and I just needed like a woman's perspective, right? The book really needed a woman's perspective. So that relationship specifically, the relationship between Val and her best friend Bernice, Wynne really fleshed that out.
Well, Bernice is like everyone knows Bernice, right? If you've read the book, everybody knows who Bernice is. And also, Bernice was like the girl that hung out with your group all the time, right?
Yeah,
Your group of guys, there was the one Bernice character.
That's right. Yeah, like very early on, I was told that the only kind of girl I know how to write in my stories is the one girl in an all-guy friend group, because that was the girl that I hung out with most when I was young, right? Yeah, so Bernice is a little bit like that.
It's a little bit like that. In my head, Bernice was my character as an adult, and then Val was my character as a kid. Like, I think that's what it was, sort of like the voice, no, sorry, not me as an adult, me in my 20s. So I'm cynical, I'm hard, realistic. I haven't yet met my partner in life yet, and so I'm gonna just be enjoying life. That's Bernice. And then Val is the kid in you that never sort of gave up on the whole idea of everything.
Yes, definitely. I mean, our attitudes change, right, as we have experiences, as we hopefully get more mature. And actually, that brings us to, so the story, if you're kind of starting to piece it together, if you haven't read it, it's about this teenager, Valentina, her best friend, her kind of adventures in love, but her family also plays a really important role. And so there's not just romantic love in the story, but also this wonderful familial love. So Val is just with her dad, it's just the two of them. And I noticed that the way he shows love is through protection. He wants to keep her safe. He wants her to, not feel sadness or pain, which I know is common for parents universally, but can you talk to us more about that and maybe your own experiences being parents and having been parented? Tell us about that relationship.
Gene always likes to laugh because his daughters have to read this book, and he's like, I don't want to have her, watching the kissing parts. The kissing parts, whatever. Gene, go ahead.
I think, so like I said, my wife and I have 4 kids, and I'm kind of an anxious person. Luckily, my wife is not. My wife is much more securely attached to her own family and to the world. I'm a very anxious person, and that anxiety kind of informs the way I parent, And early on, when my kids are young especially, I felt like my desire to protect them often got in the way of them just living and experiencing life. And it took me a long time to figure out that love and safety aren't always the same thing. Keeping somebody safe isn't always the best expression of love for them.
Yeah. There is in this story, it's funny, this is the first young adult story I've ever done, because I'm mostly a picture book person. So to approach this story, usually I approach it with my own background, my own history, but I realized as I was reading the script for this one that the character I identified with the most was the father, because the father is my age. And when you realize that, suddenly that character who on the page doesn't have that many lines, he's got a lot of meaning in his actions and his intent, and a lot of unspoken emotions that have to come out in the few panels that he occupies the page, so that you understand that relationship. And in fact, that's always the limitation with graphic novels, is that you only get a certain number of panels to communicate an emotion, to communicate the way a person actually feels. So you just have such little real estate to establish who this character is. And in fact, all the characters are like that. The grandparents, all the different generations that are represented. For like immigrant Asians in particular, we have this connection with our past that we can't let go because we're constantly reminded by your parents, like, this is what we did for you, this is how you got here, this is what we sacrificed. And so it weighs in on almost all of your decisions in life. And there's something lovely in Val's character because she's one step apart from that. She wasn't exposed to her family. She gets exposed to them very quickly later. And to an extent, it's a little bit, I think, what like I felt growing up, because my family came over from Vietnam, and we didn't know any of my extended family beyond that. So what little Vietnamese culture I had was only from my parents, and they were so busy working that they couldn't pass some of that stuff on. So it was a nice opportunity to have the character Val be introduced to the Vietnamese culture as I'm kind of grasping it and speaking to my mother. And speaking of mothers, like the grandmother in there, the grandmother is my mother. And my mother is never going to read this book, but she carries it around in her purse. Like, the grandmother in the book is I just drew my mother in the book. And she carries it around in her purse, and she keeps telling all of her friends she'll go to church and she'll pull out. And she's like, look what my daughter wrote about me. It's not, but that's what she says. None of her friends are going to read it, so they just believe her too. And Jean is nobody in her life. I'm so sorry, Jean. Like, you don't even exist in the book.
That is a perfect segue. I wanted to touch on one other showing of love, and that is the grandmother, and it's through food. So the grandmother is Vietnamese. She's bringing all this beautiful looking Vietnamese food, bags of it, to the house. Have you eaten yet? I think a lot of us can identify with that, right? Those relatives that show you how much they care about you by just feeding you, and sometimes feeding you and feeding you and feeding you. I did notice throughout the book you so beautifully illustrated all the different kinds of food that they're eating: Vietnamese, Chinese. They're also eating like Italian food, like all the different things. I was wondering if food was something you talked about as an important element of the story.
Did we?
Well, I think we talked a lot about Lunar New Year.
Yeah.
And Lunar New Year, food is like such a huge part of how Asians and Asian Americans celebrate Lunar New Year, that food was naturally a part of that, And I think this might be true for most immigrant parents, but especially Asian immigrant parents. They don't express that they love you through words, right? And if they ever try, everybody just feels really awkward about it. So the way they do it is through food.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And there's a lot of like food symbolism, in the idea of Lunar New Year anyway. There's like the moon cakes that represent the sun and the earth, and there's just so much in food that really is part of the Asian culture. You're absolutely right. It's how you express love. It's how you express connections with everyone else. That whole image, there's an image where the grandmother is carrying in like a laundry basket. That's my mom. That's what she does every Thanksgiving. Like, we will invite her to Thanksgiving. We will have a turkey. We will have all the American foods. Regardless, she will bring 75 pounds of food and just shove the turkey aside. Dried turkey is the worst to eat, but you can eat Vietnamese food for days and days. It keeps really, really well. So yeah, it's absolutely true. Food becomes very, very important in the story.
I love that. And that actually brings us to how Asian American this story is. So Val, who we've been talking about, she is Vietnamese American. There are also characters who are Chinese American, Korean American. And actually, we did not do this on purpose, but Jean is Chinese American. Wen is Vietnamese American, and I'm Korean American.
Wow.
So we're kind of like a little mini version. All three are cultures that celebrate Lunar New Year.
Yep.
And I thought you just so beautifully showed some of the similarities, like those celebrations, but also the differences. I have to admit, I am Korean American. I was learning about the lion dance, the Korean version, from your book. I was not really that familiar. Actually, could you talk a little bit about the lion dance in particular? That's a very important theme, not just for Lunar New Year in general, but in the story.
Yeah. I mean, in the early outlines of the story, Lion Dance was not part of it. I just knew that it was going to be about Valentine's Day and Lunar New Year. And I don't know why it took so long for us to land on lion dance. Because when we did, everything fit together. Because lion dancing is essentially two young people sweating under a sheet, right? So it's like so perfect for a rom-com. It's like metaphorically perfect for a rom-com. And we had a lot of help. We had a lot of help. We had lion dance consultants. We had an official consultant that was hired to help us out. Her name is Shifu Mimi Chan. She runs a studio out of Florida. And if you've ever been to Epcot Center and you've seen lion dancing at the Chinese pavilion, that's her team that does that.
She's also the model for Mulan.
That's
she
right.
modeled for Mulan, the character, the Disney character.
Yeah.
Way back in the day. But when I wasn't able to go to Florida, but because as the artist I had to really understand how the lion dancing stuff worked, I had to go and research someone on this coast. Or sorry, we're on the wrong coast. On the West Coast. And Mimi referred me to another instructor, Shifu Richard Yao, out in San Francisco. And that was when, like, I went to this thing with him. He had his whole troupe perform for me. He was like a Zen master. He was incredible. And he didn't understand what the heck I was doing there. I think he was just, it was like a favor to Mimi. He didn't know what I was trying to do. So I was asking a ton of questions about, well, what is the costume? How does it work? He talked about how officially, the real way you're supposed to do it is you've got, you have to have a priest that comes and blesses the outfit. So they run sort of an oil from the tip of the horn all the way down to the tail, that it has to go through the sort of very conventional way to be considered traditional lion dance. And then the way he described it was so beautiful. He was saying, if any of you guys have ever seen a lion dance, so the most powerful thing that you feel from it is the drums, right? The drums are incredibly loud. And in fact, if they're hitting it just right, not only is it establishing the tempo for the lion dancers, but you feel it in your chest. When you start to feel that collapse in your chest because it's so hard, it's so heavy. So he was talking about the importance of the drums, because what the drum does is it establishes the heartbeat of the lion. And if you feel the heartbeat of the lion, the dancers follow in sync with the heartbeat of the lion. And therefore, those two people essentially become one creature with a single heart. That was the perfect metaphor for a love story. And I thought, Gene is a genius. He's so smart. And then he tells me the whole sweating under a sheet thing. And I'm like, what? What the what?
It's the same idea. Same idea.
No,
same
no,
idea.
no.
I have to say, like, I do also draw. I didn't draw this comic, but I do also draw, so I know something about what it takes to draw. And the way Win was able to capture movement in the lion dance scenes in the book is just like, it's she's uniquely talented. Like the fact that the lion looks like a single entity, but you can still see the bodies underneath. I can tell you as an artist, that is very, very difficult, and she pulled it off all the way through.
Agreed. I'm actually shocked to hear, Gene, that the lion dance element was not there from the beginning, because it is such a perfect metaphor, not just for a partnership, but also when Val is learning the dance and she's a little off. It's sort of like when you're starting a new relationship and you're starting to get to know each other, and maybe you don't totally agree on things, or maybe your communication styles are a little different. It was just like so perfect. I cannot believe that came in later. That is shocking. It worked out so well. And agreed that when just you showed it so beautifully. If you don't know, and I think I didn't really know, there's a person in front who controls the head of the lion, and then there's someone behind who has to bend down, and you really have to move in complete sync, as you were saying, Win. And the way you drew it, I was like, I am learning right now how this works. It's really, you have to pick up the book and see it. It's amazing. Another thing I wanted to talk about was, this was a small element, but I noticed that when Val's grandmother is speaking in Vietnamese to her son, Val's father, you did not translate the Vietnamese. And I thought that was a really interesting, for me, like, I didn't know what they were saying. And I could have, like, gotten out a Google Translate, but I chose to keep it how it was. Can you talk a little bit about that decision?
I mean, a big part of the book is this young woman, Val, who's been disconnected with her culture, right? She doesn't grow up celebrating Lunar New Year. She doesn't really even grow up speaking a lot of Vietnamese. So part of the purpose of the book is as Val learns about Lunar New Year, as Val learns about her own culture, connects with her own Asian American identity, the reader is along for the ride, is along for the journey. So for those pieces, we wanted the reader to kind of feel the way Val would in
Yeah.
those situations.
In fact, if you can't understand what's happening, you have to resort to the body language, to what it is that they're showing emotionally. That's exactly what it's like to be in a household where Vietnamese is spoken so rapid fire that you don't understand what's happening. So I could only watch like my parents' postures to see at some point what it was that they were talking about. And that's great. And in that way, it sort of puts you in the uncomfortable position that Val is in, to struggle to understand what's going on, but to have to read body cues instead of anything else.
Yeah.
I love that you brought up body language, because another element of the story that makes it not just very Asian American, but very now, there is a huge element of text, cell phones, and that is also rapid fire, but you're not getting any of those facial expressions, tone, body positions. Tell us about how you incorporated that. I feel like that's still something that storytellers are struggling with. How do you incorporate technology into storytelling?
Yeah, I think that's totally true. I think in a lot of ways, technology has made it more difficult to bring drama into your stories. You know what I mean? Like because communication is so easy, sometimes it's difficult to center stories where miscommunication is a large part of it. But I think we leaned into exactly what you were talking about, how sometimes with text, you don't get the emotion behind the text. So you need to show the emotion in other ways in your story.
I don't know. I'm finding text to be really, like my husband, 1 year for Christmas, you know what he did? He took all the texts that we've written to each other from like the first year, I think 2008 was the earliest, and he put it in a book. Like he made it all into a little book. You flip through those, there's a history there. There's like grocery lists of things that you ate in 2012. There's like the restaurants that you went to, the friends who were breaking up that you're texting each other about, the pictures that you're sending each other of like different places from around the world. Like there's a lot to be said in that small collection of memories that you spend not even like a tiny bit of your brain to invest into. But it's like, I think you were talking earlier about, you can see the insides of the pockets of President Abraham Lincoln when he was shot, like it's on display here. That's what texts are. They're these little remnants of slices of your life that you don't think about, but that actually add up to a whole full life.
Absolutely.
So there's something in that, in this, even though I know you talk a lot about text, about digital, about social media sort of distancing you, in a weird way, it's also a catalog of our lives. And for young people, it's probably a very in-depth catalog.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking, if someone collected all of my text, I think I would be mortified.
What have you got there, Diane?
It would just be like so dumb. That's the real thing. Like it would be like the dumbest memes. Anyway, but that's so sweet that he did that. I love that.
Yeah. I think Alex is actually good at romance.
My husband.
Your husband,
That's my
Alex, is
husband.
actually good at romance. Yeah.
He's good, yeah. That's why I married him. Not the other atrocities. Anyway.
I love it. Okay, so I wanted to get more into kind of the technical, like how did this book come together? How did you work together? A big question I had, we talked a little bit about how Asian American the story is. At what point, Jean, did you decide the backgrounds of the different characters? So Val is Vietnamese American. You are not Vietnamese American. Was that a decision you made from the start?
We played around with different cultural identities for the different characters, right? So I think for me, I'm Chinese American. I'm married to a Korean American. Those are the two Asian cultures that I have the most access to, where the homework is the easiest, you know. And then at some point we decided that the main character would be Val, and it would be Vietnamese American, and I thought that was like that was a perfect decision. I don't know why we didn't decide that earlier, because she's lived the homework, you know. So in terms of the way all of the cultures interact, I really wanted to reflect Oakland. So I spent a number of years of my life in Oakland. There is a thriving Asian American community there, and it's really pan-Asian. You know, it's all the Asians kind of mixed together, and then everybody's culture kind of bleeds into the other. I was hoping to convey some of that in the story.
Yeah. There's something, for me, what's really interesting is that I've done many, many, many books, but I haven't done a lot of Asian books, if really any. And part of the reason why is when I first entered the children's book world, if you came in sort of as the Asian illustrator, that was all you got. You didn't get any other kind of story out there. And I didn't want to I didn't want to fit into a very, very narrow niche. I wanted to be able to illustrate it. I just wanted to be able to say, I can draw whatever you want me to draw. So I think there was something in me that sort of pushed away stories because I just didn't want to have to go narrow, narrow, narrow. It's taken a long time. It's taken a lot of progress in the children's book world for a story to come about where the characters were just incidentally Asian. Like, it's just a great story, and they happen to be Asian. And so suddenly, I could enter into this wholeheartedly because I wasn't doing it because I was Asian. I was doing it because I understood what it was to be Asian. And that was the difference. I was able to come into it with a whole lot more, and so just so much more heart goes into something like that. I've also discovered, though, that it takes so much of you. Like, you bleed a lot for stories like this, that I can understand why you don't do as many stories if you're writing it, because it just consumes too much of your own self, your own identity. And I think as an artist, I like to be able to step back and see other people's perspectives. I don't bleed as much from my stories. So this is definitely a story where I felt I was able to tap into a lot of the lived history and to feel all that. But again, it's incidental to the story, the fact that they're Asian, and it's Pan-Asian, and that's the world I think we grew up in.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Like, yeah. That's how we didn't see our friends distinguished by the races, and we just hung out with whoever we hung out with. Yeah. And it was the first evidence I ever saw of a story that was most reflective of something like that, or closer to my own truth, I guess.
Yeah, I agreed that it is an incidental part of the story, but it's also conveyed with such authenticity. I mean, you were saying you lived the homework, like it's right there. Just the ways that the characters do have different aspects of their cultures. I'm thinking of, there's a character named Jay who is in Val's circle. His uncle, who's Korean, I was like, this is every one of my Korean uncles. Like, he's very like I was reading all of his lines as like shouting, like he's very like he has an intensity. Yeah, so so many compliments to you. I feel like you really just got all of those different notes so well. And if you know it, you're like, oh yeah, they know it. But if you don't, it's still a wonderful story. It's not like you have to know the whole history of Korea or whatever. Anyway, so well done. Okay, so I would love to talk a little bit more about that process. So Jean, from what I understand, I think you wrote the whole story first, but did you also have some ideas about the art? Am I?
Yeah, I mean, I think Win was involved in the story very early on. Like I would do an outline, and Win would give me notes, and I would do another outline, and Win would give me notes. Or we would talk about Win's life, and there'd be such funny stories from her early dating life that we would have to put them in the book. Like, for example,
we would have to put them in the book. That's right.
For example, the very first date that Val goes on in the book is essentially one of the dates that Win went on when she was a teenager.
Oh, no.
Yeah. He's going to show up at one of these things, and I'm going to be like, oh, my God, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so Win was involved from the get-go. But at some point, I did the script, and then like the baton was kind of passed over to Win. But I feel like we were both involved all the way through, right?
You can't do it. Like, I keep threatening to do this. Gene doesn't send a script. He sends a graphic novel.
No, that's not true.
Yeah. He draws the entire book out.
That's not true.
And then, yes, what are you talking about? Yes, he does. So I'm going to release it out there in the dark web. You're just going to have to go looking for it. But there is a version of the story where Gene has drawn everything, all the characters and everything. And the really difficult thing is when you see something like that, as an artist, you can't unsee it. You can't unsee it the way someone else saw it. And it took me, there's 12 chapters in the book? It took me the first 3 chapters to get past what Gene saw, like to finally break through. So the first 3 chapters are like almost panel for panel exactly what Gene had, with a few exceptions here and there. But it wasn't until probably like chapter 4 that I was finally able to pull myself away from what it was that he'd drawn and what it was that he'd expected.
They're like sketches. They're not.
Whatever!
They're sketches. And the other thing is like I said, like out of all the projects I've worked on, this is the one where the artist bled the most into the writing. There are full scenes that Win just did on her own. Like the very first scene in the book, that was completely you. You did both the writing and the drawing on that.
Yeah.
Yes, you did. And the final scene, like one of the most important scenes in the book, the final scene between Val and her father, Win also wrote and drew. Like the arc with Val's father, I think we had struggled with a long time. And at some point, Win was just like, I'm going to do this, and it was perfect.
But Gene's I'm going to do my Gene stick here. Like, Gene's a really, really generous writer. And I think there was something where if you're sitting and you're drawing, like, what makes a graphic novelist kind of interesting is that they're not just drawing, they're acting. So that's your job, is you've got a director who's giving you lines, but then you have to act it out. And there are always moments where you feel like, okay, something is missing here. And I would sort of insert some lines in and then timidly pass it over to Gene and be like, what do you think, is this okay? Should we sort of add this moment? And Gene would always like be like, yeah, let me fix up the line a little bit, but yeah, let's do it. And I think that happens in the moment when you draw and you find this moment needs like an extra resting point or an extra beat or a conclusion in some way that maybe wasn't there. And something of that was just really fun. You have to have a writer who is very confident in what they write, very confident, not in themselves, but in the story. Like, that makes all the difference. And at some point, the story, I always try to describe this, and I don't think I'm doing it right, but there's the story that exists up here, the book that it's meant to be, and both the writer and the artist are just trying to reach that level of the story. It's outside of both of us. And we're both trying to reach it. And so all egos get checked out at the door. Like, you just do whatever you need to do. So it means if you need to add, 50 pages to the writing, you add 50 pages. If you add 50 pages to the illustration, you add 50 pages, because that's what's needed to get the story to where it needs to go. But that's
Win did that. Win the writer was mean to Win the artist. when I handed over the book, it was 200 pages. Was it 200 pages?
No, it's like 240.
But Win the writer added 50 pages for Win the artist to draw. Yes.
You wanted a challenge.
No, the story, the book was up here. We just needed to get there, that's all. Yeah.
And I heard, like, on the same note, I heard that the time it took you to do this was
Oh my
actually
gosh.
very impressive.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'll give a context. I also draw my own books. I did a book called American Born Chinese, which is about 200 pages. It took me 5 years to finish. This book is 340 pages. And how long did it take you to draw, Win?
7 months, Gene.
That's insane. That's insane. Yeah, like I tell people, like, drawing is something that I do. It's something I do. But for Win, it's like a superpower. She's like a mutant artist.
Okay, Gene.
And I have to, I am merely a fan, not an expert, but you also did the coloring.
Yes.
A lot of books, there's a separate person whose whole job is to color, but you did that in addition to the drawings. Is that correct?
And the lettering. Drawing,
Also a
coloring,
separate
lettering.
job.
7 months. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing.
Thank you.
You made a book faster than humans can make a whole baby. Like,
That's right. That's right.
That's incredible.
That's right.
That's a weird way of putting it, but
Sorry.
I'm going to quote you on that. Wow.
So, okay, I'm trying to picture your process. So were you doing like a few pages at a time, sending them to Gene? He sends his note. Like, how does that work?
The book broke down to 12 chapters, so it went a chapter a week. So I would draw out the drawings and then send it to Gene, and then he and the editors would sit and play with notes, and then I would just keep going through the chapter. So like 12 weeks for all the drawings. And then all the notes would come back, and then I'd readjust some of the notes according to what she needed. And then inked probably in a month and a half or 2 months. And then, but the coloring, if you look at it, the coloring, I had the idea figured out early on that it was going to be based on the colors of the Feng Shui wheel. So I had the wheel in front of me, and each section of the wheel represents, there's a theme to it. So there's family, there's wealth, there's career. And so each chapter sort of coincidentally coincided with something on the wheel. And so I assigned the chapters the colors of the Feng Shui wheel as it was appropriately, matched, with the exception of, I think there were 3 chapters with the color red and 1 chapter with the color pink. And those are the chapters in which the love story gets pushed forward. And red is a very symbolic color in both East and West interpretation. And so because of that, those were the key moments that where red had to be chosen for that particular. Even the colors of the lions, we had huge discussions about what color the lions should be because they each represent different things. I think the three main colors of lion dancing are yellow, blue, and red.
That's right.
And so like if you're opening a bank, you have to use a blue lion. But for New Year's, you have to have a red lion, and white is only for funerals. So each of them have sort of different meanings to it. And I remember there was a point where we freaked out because I colored the lion the wrong color for the end of the book, and I had to go back and recolor all of that. It was kind of nuts, yeah. There's a lot to, but you could basically follow the color and understand what the theme of that chapter is actually supposed to be, just based on the color that I chose to dominate.
It's so, I know you can't see it. If you just flip through the book, it is like telling you a color story. You can actually see the colors that pop out as you flip through. It's incredible. I have to emphasize again, you did this in 7 months. Speaking of the chapters also, I noticed that the chapters also had another theme that tied in with some Eastern ideas. Could you tell us about that?
The animals.
The Lunar New Year,
animals.
yeah.
Yeah.
We had, initially the book had how many chapters? It was like 9?
It was 10. It was 10. And then Wynn was like, this is about Lunar New Year. What are you doing with 10 chapters?
Yeah.
So we ended up making it 12 because there are 12 animals in the Asian zodiac.
Yeah. It was tricky too because the book came out the year of the dragon. And
That's right.
we had to know, so if you look at the very end, the festival they have, it's Year of the Dragon. You'll see it sort of in the background, even though we don't mention what year it actually is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always thought, what, you're an ox, aren't you?
Yeah, we're both.
We're both ox.
Yeah.
That's right. I always forget.
Yeah.
We're like days apart.
We almost have the same birthday. I'm 1 year older. One day older than
Oh,
Wynn.
wow.
Yeah.
I know. Kind of nutty.
The zodiac, you're like on the same groove. No wonder
Yeah,
you
yeah,
work
yeah.
so well
we
together.
are on the same groove.
Yeah, we're hardworking oxen.
Yes.
I love it. Okay, another thing that I cannot emphasize enough how impressed I am that you did this so quickly. The facial expressions, the poses, we talked a little earlier about how you rendered those lion dancers, but there are all these like really subtle facial expressions where you see Val feeling disgust, hesitation. I'm picturing those like old, like behind the scenes Disney, like how do they do it? And the animators are like making faces in the mirror. Like, were you doing that at home?
Yeah. I think drawing faces is probably the one thing that I will say I'm naturally, I can do well. And I don't know why that is. That's like everything else I struggle with, everything else I work very hard for color, I work very hard for line, but for some reason acting, it's not that it's tough for me, it just comes very, very naturally. It's really funny. I wish you guys could see Gene's version, because then you could see the emotion where he's like, and then I have to turn that into grief and sorrow, you know? Or I'm doing a graphic novel now where the writer, she does movies, but she gives me like these terrifying descriptors. Says, the saddest face of all time, or the most beautiful sunset ever envisioned. Like, no problem, sure. It's the worst kind of descriptors. But I think there's something where when you're drawing, you can feel it sort of in your body, and you can feel it. A lot of it has to do with the figure and the line, and it's not actually the face, it's the body. Like the postures of where the shoulders go. You can sort of see it. Like, I could look out at the crowd and tell stories just by the way people are actually sitting on their, like, you're sitting up very, very straight over there, and there are some kids who are just like, everything is told through like your spine, through where your eyes are positioned, where your shoulders are, the arch of your eyebrows. Like, most things on your face stay stationary, but there are just sort of small telltale elements that when you understand how they function and they work, it's very easy to communicate.
Yeah, it's amazing how just the slightest angle tilt of a mouth will just completely change. So are you looking in a mirror? Are you taking photos of yourself? Like, how does that work?
I look in a mirror, and then I just draw it over multiple times. I have like, it takes about 3 or 4 drawings before you hit on the drawing that's right.
Jean, is this a similar process for you when you're...
I'm not as fast or as subtle as Wynn. I mean, that's one of the reasons why when we were talking about this book very early on, my editor and I agreed that I would not be the one drawing it, and we really landed on one name. So if Win had said no, I don't know if we would have. I don't think we would have done it.
I mean, I can't imagine. This is like such a perfect partnership. Like all of your skills are just top level. So I'm so glad it worked out. So thank you. I just wanted to ask, like, what in this brief 7 months, I guess, that you were working, what were some things did you like learn about each other working together?
Oh no, are we doing this?
I can't. I'm under contract not to reveal anything I know about Jean. But if you follow my Instagram, it tells you everything. No.
Well, I've always toured on my own. So and then earlier this year, Win and I actually toured together. We did an East Coast tour and then a West Coast tour, and I think like I don't have a sister, but I feel like she's like a little sister.
One day.
One day counts. One day counts, dude. Yeah, like a little like bratty sister.
Hey! You so full of yourself. Whatever. No, what I found out about Jean is actually it just confirmed everything that I thought I always knew about him. You know, like Jean and I have known each other for a really long time. Like I was at the table when American Born Chinese in its Xeroxed form was handed over to the editor.
Wow.
And I think that was when we met that night, right? That was the night that we met. And then since then, because we lived in the Bay Area, we just sort of kept in touch. And it's just one thing where it's like we always wanted to work with each other, but we just didn't know how that was going to happen. He was always busy, I was always busy. So this kind of coming together, it's like everything that I thought I knew about Jean was absolutely right. Like he's just that nice of a guy. He's just that generous. He's like bonkers storyteller. You tell him one thing and the next day it's in the script. Don't talk to Jean unless you want to have your life splashed all over. And he does it in such a funny way. And he turns phrases like, whenever we were talking about like if I added lines, he would just go through it with like a little Jean vacuum cleaner and just clean it up. And it would just be parsed down to the lines that are essential and needed and be funny. Like that's really, really hard to do. And Jean's just that way. He's just an amazing storyteller, and he's just very, very good at bringing ideas and pulling them together and making like this perfect little dish out of them.
Here's something I learned about Win. I've done a good number of signings. I've been at this for a long time. I've never seen somebody sign like Win. Like if you buy a book and bring it up to Win to sign, she will draw you in the book on the spot. Like it's kind of shocking.
They're signing right after this, by the way.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
get it, run to the line, run.
Yeah, she'll draw a portrait of you, and there's no other artist that does that.
Because it's nice. If you
It
do
is
what you
nice, but
want,
it's also like really.
But it's nice.
It's very mutant power-ish that you can do that.
And it means that Jean ups his game because since I have to draw, he has to draw.
Yeah, I do a little sketch. They're not in the same category.
So
They're not
you
in the
get a
same
double
category.
whammy with us, that's all.
I love it. Well, I could keep talking to you all day, but I think we can do some audience Q&A.
Sure.
Did we have the microphones? If you have a question, we've been talking about Lunar New Year Love Story. I know I personally would love to talk to you about both of your many other books. So if anyone has any questions, I'm just going to open it up so you can be ready. But yeah, you can feel free to step up to the mic if you'd like to ask a question. Don't be shy.
Hi. First of all, Jean, thank you for bringing like Avatar: The Last Airbender to the world. 'Cause, like my friends and I have like so many conversations over it, and we just really, really love like Avatar: The Last Airbender. So thank you for bringing that into the world.
Oh yeah, thank you. I mean, I have a very small corner in that, right? I was a huge fan of the show when it was airing, and then when they offered me to be a part of the continuation comic, I was thrilled. Like Avatar, I've realized is not just a show. It's like a kind of a cult. Like people love that show,
Yes.
and it affects their lives, you know. So it's really been a pleasure to be a part of it.
My friends are gonna be so psyched. I met someone who like helped with Avatar and Legend of Korra and everything.
Yeah.
So we're definitely gonna have a conversation about Avatar and like talking about Korra, who's like legit one of the best characters like
Yeah,
in the whole
agreed.
series. So we're probably just gonna have a whole conversation on that again, which I'm super excited for. But so I literally just picked up your book today. Like, I saw it. I was in the book thing. I was like, oh, this is cool, and I got it. So I only read like a couple pages. But I was just wondering, how did you get the idea for like her imaginary friend to be like a Cupid?
I mean, that was actually from Wynn's life. So we when we talked about, there's so much from Wynn's life in this book. When we talked about Valentine's Day early on, she told me, oh, you know, at some point I thought Saint Valentine was actually the Cupid, because that's what's on the card.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not. He's the scary-looking guy that has a skull in Rome, and he's got that terrible-looking statue.
Yeah, we wanted the Saint Valentine character to kind of represent the different ways in which we think about love. So a lot of us, when we're young, we think about love as very sweet. When we become teenagers, we become very cynical about love. And then at some point, I think, usually in adulthood, we realize love is like this marriage between joy and suffering. So that's what we wanted to get through in the book.
And also, Jean, I think like the Valentine's character is fun because he goes from being a little Cupid to this monster, right? And that was the part where this book was a little bit like Everything Everywhere All at Once, kind of like I could not put my finger on what the genre was supposed to be. Is it a romance? Is it a fantasy? And I couldn't get any stage direction from this one, because every time I would draw the saint, he'd be like, make it scarier, make it like dripping off. And I'm just like, is this a love story? What the heck? What am I drawing here? But that was a lot of fun to kind of have that metamorphosis from the cute Cupid to this scary spirit.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, it's nice to meet you all. I just wanted to start off by saying, Jean, thank you so much for like your career. American Born Chinese came out when I think I was 7, and you were like the only one doing Asian American stories when I was growing up. So I've been a fan for.
Thank you. That makes me feel a little bit old, but in a good way. Thank you.
So yeah, I just wanted to start. My question basically focuses on, I love how throughout your career you've taken, whether it's like the introspective, like historical epic type story in Boxers and Saints, here like the rom-com concept, or making Superman Chinese. Like, I feel like you've always taken these classic story concept, like classic American or classic story concepts, and depicted them in such a specifically Asian context. I also want to compliment the art in the book as well, because it's just such a beautiful, authentic, true-to-life depiction of like the Asian American experience. I want to ask, going forward in the future, if there are any other types of stories, classic characters, classic frameworks that you think would be an amazing thing to define, like you did here, in a specifically Asian context going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a little bit of a bucket list. Like I want to do sci-fi. I'm actually working on a sci-fi project right now. Oh, thanks. And then I also would like to do detective at some point, but we'll see if that happens. What's on your bucket list?
Detective is cool. I don't know. I reached the point where it's like, if so long as I'm happy working with, like Jean kind of spoiled me. So I used to just get manuscripts and say yes and then do my part on it. But now I feel like I don't want to do that. I really like that process of sharing with someone and finding a book that exists above both of us. And that's kind of my goal these days. My bucket list has been achieved. Meg Medina, who's the ambassador now, I'm working with her too. So I'm like hitting all the ambassadors one after another. But it's the joy, I think, is in the process of finding someone who you both feel like you want to be above something better than what you yourself can make on your own. And so I don't know if it's like a genre thing. I think it's just a matter of being with someone who just pulls out sort of the best in you. That's my bucket list. That's not my bucket list. That is just my MO for the rest of my life, right? Like that's what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life if I can pull it off.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything you do for the culture.
Thank you.
Hi, I just had a question about what you thought about the future of Asian American literature, because when I was younger, a lot of the books were about children directly having contact with their culture, like their parents were immigrants to America. But now, obviously, as we're getting older, they're having children who are having children, so we're kind of getting a distance from that direct point of Asian culture. So I wanted to ask if you had any thoughts about how the future of Asian American literature is going to reflect that, or if it will.
I feel like I might be wrong, but in my lived history, I feel like Asian culture is American culture now. You know, like it's just American culture is a mishmash of everything out there, and those stories are starting to come out. Where I think 15 years ago, if someone said, "Oh, can you write a story about a Vietnamese character?" It was with the intention of you were going to talk about the history. You're going to talk. There was a responsibility put on the shoulders of storytellers to communicate that. And I sort of feel like we're at a generational divide now where now you can just tell the story. The weight of that history is intrinsically there, but it's not the point of the story. It's what happens to the character who's got that weight. How do they make their choices through life, and what kind of story can be told from that perspective? And that's essentially the story of like any American at all, with the history of their own lives. And in that way, I feel like there's a stronger fabric that's being woven because cultures aren't divided in that way. They're being brought together to tell a story. At least that's my hope. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I taught for a very long time at Hamline University in the St. Paul area. I taught in an MFA program. And one of my students wrote this paper about minority representation within Americans' children's literature. And she identified 4 different phases. She says in the beginning, a minority community is just not there. And then the second phase is they show up, but they show up either as villains or as comic relief. And then the third phase is about the struggle of being within that minority community, right? And I think my own book, American Born Chinese, kind of fits in this third phase. And then she says the last phase is where there's authentic representation, but the story itself is not about being a minority, right? You have characters from minority communities. Their culture is a huge part of who they are, but that's not what the focus of the story is. So I think we're actually moving into that fourth phase.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hi, y'all. So I met you a while ago at SCBWI. I'm Dare Coulter. I'm an illustrator.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Was it in Georgia?
No,
Sorry.
North Carolina.
Okay, that's it. Sorry.
Yeah. So question with 2 artists working. I'm a little bit tall today. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. With 2 artists working together, I know that Jean, you wrote, and Lei Wen, you illustrated, but the process, does it shift differently? Like, are there parts of process that were impacted by working with an author who's also an illustrator? Like, has this changed how either of you guys work together? And also, that paper that you were talking about, if I can send you an email so I can read it, we'll do that later because that sounds great.
Wow. Well, you've impacted me. Like I said, I just always want to work with writers now. Have I impacted you, Jean? Have I?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like I think for this one, because we trusted each other, the duties were not super clear cut, right? Like Win definitely did a lot of writing, and then I did some sketching, and it was nice to be able to bleed back and forth. I think.
And I think there's something too when an artist is illustrating for another artist. There's a higher expectation that's kind of set, right? So because I knew exactly what he intended for it already, it's like, okay, let me show you why you pulled me onto this team. Like, let me show you what my strength is to complement your strength as much as possible. And there's something that's kind of fun in that I don't know that you necessarily feel that for every single writer, but for someone who's visually oriented, you want to please that other person so badly. I wanted to please you. I am the little sister. Sorry.
I do have to emphasize, I was trying to be nice to Win the artist by keeping the page count low, but Win the writer just kept adding pages. I mean, the book is better for it, but Win the artist had to work really, really hard for 7 months.
To make the book that was above the both
Correct,
of us.
correct.
She's also superhuman, though. So
She is superhuman,
that's an exception.
100%. She is superhuman.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Yang, I guess. I just wanted to ask about Boxers and Saints.
Mr. Yang. Sorry.
Did I pronounce it wrong? I'm so sorry.
No, it was perfect. It was perfect. Win's being mean.
I am.
It's fine. Just flustered. Just wanted to ask, which is, did you ever find it hard to write, I guess, like, believable dialogue for a time period that isn't really anything like our own? Or anything like that?
Yeah, I think dialogue is something that I struggle with constantly, and I think I think I'm a little checkered in that, right? There are certain books that I've written where the dialogue is clunky, for sure. For historical pieces, what I found is you have to find something in the middle, in between the way people talked back then and the way people talk now, right? It can't be perfectly like how we talk now, or it's not going to be believable. But if you go all the way to the back, like all the way to the time period, the dialogue doesn't feel natural enough to the reader to be able to carry the reader from the beginning of the story to the end. So finding that middle ground is often very tricky. I had to do the same thing with Superman Smashes the Klan. I listened to all these old, it's set in the 1940s, so I listened to all these old 1940s radio shows. And then when I wrote the dialogue as closely as I could to the 1940s, it just didn't read right. You have to find something in the middle.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both for sharing your works. Gene, thank you very much for being a big old nerd.
That's how I was made. That's how I was made.
Not many superheroes or characters from like Marvel, DC, Big Two have been written about the writing for them as much as people have written about writing Superman. So this question first for you is, what was the hardest part about writing Superman for you? And then for Wen, what, I'm unfamiliar with your body of work, so I apologize, but if you are a nerd yourself, in what ways are you a nerd? And
Really?
She's a nerd. She's totally a nerd.
and if you were to write a character for the Big Two, or for a comic book series, what sort of character do you have a particular affinity for?
So for Superman, the hardest part is he's been around since the late 1930s, and almost every story has been done about him already. I remember when I first signed on to do Superman, I kept throwing out story idea after story idea after story idea, and my editor would be like, oh, we did that 2 years ago. We did that 6 months ago. That was 5 years ago. It was just very difficult to find something like new ground within the Superman universe.
When I was a kid, I always just identified with the male characters. Like, I wanted to be Wolverine. I didn't want to be Storm. I didn't want to wear the tight outfit. I wanted like the cool gear. So Wolverine was always kind of my guy. I wanted to be Indiana Jones so badly. I didn't want to be Princess Leia. I wanted to be Luke Skywalker. Like, I just kind of, because they always had the best weapons, I guess. I don't know. So I'm very, very much a nerd in that way. But I'm still sort of new to the graphic novel world because, like I said, my playing field is picture books. So for me, it's a lot of fun to enter this world because there's like this group of comic book people that I'm just starting to get to know, and I feel like a fraud in there, like sneaking sort of my way in.
You're not. She's done like literally thousands of pages of comics at this point.
But you still feel like you don't. If you don't know the history, if you haven't read every single thing, if you haven't got like the entire series, if you're not nerd in the sense of like that, I feel like I'm just a fraud, and I'm sort of sitting around kind of trying to absorb. But if I could do any Star Wars book, or if Indiana Jones ever made it as a children's book, like that's kind of the area that I absolutely in love with.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I know there are still people waiting, but unfortunately we are out of time. The hour just flew by. I'm going to emphasize again, everyone grab a copy of this book, get it signed. Now you know she's going to do a special drawing for you. So run over there, bring your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to you. Can we get a big hand for these two? They're amazing.
Thank you
so much. Thank you. And thanks everyone for coming. Enjoy the rest of the National Book Fest.